Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 1022, Power Matrix. Neil chuckled and got to his feet. Thank you for breakfast and the gifts for your countrymen. I can't say that I've ever heard of exiles finding a way to still help out after they were sent away, but I appreciate it. Carl patted him on the shoulder. I would volunteer to come back and help keep everyone in line, but it sounds like you have it all under control. The Inquisitor smirked. You think now that you're a totem that you can flex on the other nation's leadership? Carl winked at him and leaned in to whisper conspiratorially. I was rewarded with a special epic grade constitution. At this point, I can reliably solo a totem-ranked dungeon boss without bringing my beasts to assist. If you have a problem with the others, let me know. Even 5-on-1, it's unlikely that they can do significant damage to me, and I've got so much damage reduction that even a direct meteor strike wouldn't do it. Neil shook his head in dismay. You live up to your reputation, Monster Man. Warn me before you send Ray so that I can shield my quarters and not alert anyone that she has arrived. Then he turned and returned to his office so Carl could close the portal. We never did find out what the exact date was. Dana noted a few seconds after he was gone. Well, we can sort that later. Once Ray wakes up, we can get back to our hunting patrols. If we can't pin down the exact date, then we can just pick one to celebrate. Carl suggested. Now that the excitement was over, Remy returned to her lab to work and Hawk went outside to take a loop around the area looking for threats. Ray was going to need all day to recover and she would likely only wake up once the sun was down again. That was her natural active time and each of the advancements was a bit harder to recover from. They took a lot out of the spider even though it was an advancement. Can we expect the others to advance soon? Lotus asked, meaning the rest of the beasts. Thor still has a ways to go until he reaches the bottleneck, but he also advanced last, so he's still on pace. Remy has a bit more work to do as well, but Kara is close. She just prioritizes amusement to power growth, so you never know when she's actually going to advance. Carl joked. Kara shrugged. She was powerful enough for what she wanted to do. When she wasn't, she would advance. That was just how it worked. A soft mental nudge caught Carl's attention. Oh, I think the butterfly is almost ready to advance as well. Perhaps once she reaches totem rank, she will be stabilized enough that she can come out and socialize. Carl felt the mental nod and that she was learning from Ray and planned to make a grand entrance to introduce herself to the rest of the group properly. They were all aware of her work and she had interacted with them in her dreamlike state, but it would be the first time that she got to meet them all in person. That was a big thing, even bigger than just an advancement, so she had to make it grand. With nothing important to do, everyone settled into their daily tasks. The three priestesses spent most of the day in prayers. Ophelia and Thor went to spar, while Dana mediated to improve her mana pool and the stability of her new advancement. Carl did the same, but he had another goal. One of his class skills improved his soul power based on his power matrix. He currently had it at 9 points, and that had been excellent for his progression, but he had a solid vision for the 27-point formation. In theory, that should triple his growth rate and the amount of mana that he could transfer to the beast spaces up to his personal limit. So, keeping the focus on Supreme Lady Matilda, whose image he had used for the 9-point formation, Carl began focusing on filling in the extra spaces and rearranging the focal points into a much larger matrix. While he worked, he couldn't move any mana at all to the beasts. But the whole process only took a few hours of intense concentration and left him with a pounding headache that faded after a few minutes. Then Carl gently began to flow mana through the new formation, checking for imperfections before everything settled into a permanent position that he would have to destroy to alter. He didn't find any bottlenecks or instabilities as he pulled mana through to his limits. So he focused on the Blade of Champions and the life energy that it had stored. The Haint had absorbed almost all that it had stored when it awakened, so he let it keep what little soul energy it had left. He had enough work to do just with the Blade of Champions and the beast spaces. Working on advancing them was his highest priority, as only the two were actually at the totem rank. The rest were close, but not quite past the breaking point yet. That would change tonight. The spaces were improving much more rapidly than Carl had expected, now that his level wasn't a limiter on their advancement. Something outside would surely notice the mana imbalance from the amount that he was pulling, but Carl was careful not to mess with the mana balance inside the tiny world so that it didn't interfere with the others' work. That was another thing that Carl realized he should work on later. He was much more powerful than he had been when he formed the tiny world. If he wanted to, he could greatly increase the limits of the space. However, there was plenty of room even for dragons who wished to fly around and relax. So, Carl focused on a different project. He created a massive crystal near the guild house in an unused hilly section that Thor and Ophelia had deemed unsuitable for practice. As he formed it, Carl coated the entire thing in mana storage runes. He could use it as a massive mana battery like the Lich Lords had done with the crystal in their wagon. 20 tons of totem-ranked runic stone would be able to slowly collect an absolutely enormous amount of mana. That should be enough to power not only the space but all the practice that was done inside and the training of the others. Flooding the body with higher rank mana was an effective method of pushing toward an advancement, and once this was full, everyone else should be able to drag themselves toward Overlord. It might not be the most effective way to pull lower-level companions toward the highest group member's standard, but it was hundreds of times better than just letting them fumble along on their own. In a way, it was like having a mentor, as the Spellblade clans did. Someone who could teach you and help your growth progress smoothly. Only, it wasn't limited to just one class, but to members of the Darklight host and others that Carl trusted enough to bring into this space. Perhaps he should put some protective runes on the crystal or the platform it was sitting on to prevent theft attempts or misuse if someone broke in. Chapter 1023, Grand Reveal? Ray woke up after midnight that night and flexed her limbs to make sure everything was working as intended after that odd molting incident. It made sense with the crab blood that she had used, but it was a new experience for Ray, who normally just grew and reshaped herself a little. It wasn't bad though. She felt brand new and refreshed, ready to face the world in a whole new totem-ranked body. Did you want to do your reveal first or second, little sister? Ray asked as the sun began to come up in the tiny world. The butterfly thought about it. Together. I will set the stage and we can make a grand entrance. Ray waited while her little sister made the final plans. Everyone was awake now and getting into the showers. So that was the perfect moment to set up their entrance. For ranks of illusionary spiders flanking either side of the walkway to the house, with a light fog around ground level to let Ray camouflage herself more effectively until she was ready for her grand reveal. Then butterflies and sparkles in the air above them, where she would be hovering and waiting for Ray to appear and get her praise so she could swoop down for the fireworks and then introduce herself to the group. Ray tried not to laugh as she saw the royal procession that had been prepared for her, with all the illusionary spiders bowing before her. Remy and Thor dragged the group out into the yard to watch, and Lotus was practically vibrating with excitement as she realized that Ray was going to make a dramatic entrance. Ray started off invisible, then blended herself with the fog as they approached. Slowly, she adapted back to her natural black and red, as if she was emerging from the fog as she slowly strutted down the path. Whistles and cheers greeted her approach, and Lotus ran up to hug her while the others laughed. Congratulations, Ray. Excellent work on making it to totem rank. Carl congratulated her while fireworks began to explode overhead in the morning twilight. Then the butterfly appeared. Not as an illusion, but actually outside of her space for the first time since she evolved. Good morning, Sister Butterfly. Carl greeted her. You may call me Opal. I like that name. It is a pleasure to meet everyone. She replied. She fluttered down, her meter-wide transparent wings reflecting the sunlight and creating shimmering rainbows on the ground, along with the sparkles of shed mana as she moved. That was an unavoidable side effect of her species, but now that she was powerful enough, she could recover far more than was needed to sustain the loss, and she could limit the spread of the mana particles to nearly nothing. Some loss was unavoidable, but the stronger she got, the better she was at controlling it. It was strange being outside, not as much mana and all sorts of new scents and auras. But she got to actually touch people. That was surprisingly fun. So, you can finally join us on adventures, Opal? Tessa asked. Only a little bit. I will be a totem soon, and then I'll be able to stay outside all the time if I want. But it's more comfortable to stay home and let the illusions do it. Illusionary domain is my world, and being outside of it just feels weird, even if I do get to meet new people and see new things. Opal explained. That was understandable. Her illusionary world was so realistic, with illusionary people, plants, and buildings in it, that there wasn't much reason for her to ever leave home. She was essentially a city lord for a city of her own creation, with hundreds of subjects under her control. A gentle ringing, like a doorbell, filled the tiny world, and then a portal opened next to Carl. That should not be possible, Carl knew. Opening a portal into a separate space required knowing exactly where it was, not just the opening but the actual nature of the space and how it was formed. But when an extremely annoyed-looking totem-ranked vampire stepped through, nobody was startled anymore. Miss Tiffany, good morning to you and your mistress. What brings you here so early? Carl asked. The vampire examined him carefully, trying to determine what this strange man had done to himself since they met last. How did you make yourself an elite creature? That role should be reserved for dungeon bosses. She demanded, skipping the formalities. It's a pleasure to see you again as well. But really, I don't know. I went into a trial instance and it gave me the option to optimize myself. I chose that option over the others and then completed the trial, and it gave me a fancy thing for my name. I can't see it, but nobody else seemed to know what it meant. Carl explained. Dana cleared her throat, drawing Tiffany's attention. What actually brought you here today? I suspect that if you forget the important part, it might become a problem for all of us. Right? The Supreme Lady wants me to take a picture with the spider and the badger. The vampire explained. She was obviously not happy about it, but that could be the fact that she had been chased out of bed at dawn. For a vampire, this was just past their natural bedtime. Not that one as old as her would have any trouble being awake all day, but even the naturally cheerful Mick was cranky when it was too bright outside. Plus, those born as vampires from infected parents died the first time, the nature of their powers changed, and they became much more nocturnal. Kara was happy to take a group photo even if the camera was a relic and she couldn't be certain of the quality of output they were going to get. Carl set up the camera to catch the group and Opal moved to hover behind the trio while Kara stood up on her hind legs so her face was closer to Tiffany's head height. Ray still dwarfed both of them in her natural form, though she was only a little taller than Tiffany. Just much wider. There was only one button on the large tripod-mounted camera. Carl had no problems getting it lined up for the shot and then channeled mana into the button as he activated the magical device. Unexpectedly, the camera did not output a photo. Instead, a meter-wide, landscape-oriented painting formed against the legs of the tripod as if they were a painter's easel. Thank you. That will make her happy. She's been annoying me to get a picture of the Chaos Badger for ages, and now that there is a totem-ranked child of the Spider Goddess in the guild, she had to be the first to record it. Ray snorted in amusement and transformed into a humanoid. Does that mean we should expect a visitor from the Spider Goddess soon? Tiffany nodded. Likely a whole group of them to test you and the Carl. Though he's already fought off a whole group of assassins from Narret, so they might be more polite the second time. Chapter 1024, Opal is a homebody. Now that the picture was done, Tiffany collected the camera and gently picked up the magical painting. As much as I enjoy your company, I have much to do today. Thank you for your time, she announced. Once she was gone, Ray began to laugh. She really does hold a grudge, doesn't she? That vampire hates you with a burning passion. Carl shrugged. Not my fault that things turned out the way that they did. Neither of us knew that things were going to end up with a trip to the Chaos Realm and a visit from the Supreme Lady when the fight started, and I certainly had no idea about her past with Matilda. Ray shrugged and all the others looked at him like he was an idiot. It doesn't matter that it wasn't my intention, does it? Carl eventually realized. Not even a little bit. The fact is that you're the only other one involved, so you're the only other one to blame. Tessa agreed. Ophelia shrugged. She does look healthy though, doesn't she? I don't think that the dragon is treating her too badly. If she were, I would have expected her to start looking worn down and tired after a few months. Without warning, Opal vanished back into her space but left an illusionary copy of herself as a stand-in so that she could give the appearance of continued direct interaction with the world. At first, she had stayed in her space for safety and out of necessity. But now that she had seen the outside, she realized that she was actually more comfortable at home. Plus, being awake was exhausting. Not in a sense of mana deprivation, she had that under control. No, she was used to sleeping all the time and never really got mentally stressed. But being awake was totally different. And totally overrated. Are we throwing a party? Lotus asked hopefully. Ray had just revealed her advancement to totem rank that was definitely worthy of a party even if they hadn't just officially met Opal in person. That was when Lotus realized that the butterfly floating overhead was an illusion. She hadn't even noticed when the real one vanished, the transition was that smooth. That skill would be incredible in an infiltration situation where they needed to send an actual person. But it was most likely because she could retreat to her space without using a spell. Ray picked Lotus up and carried her back inside. We're going to make special snacks for today. I hope that your new food creation spells are up to it. Oh, what did you have in mind? Lotus asked. Ray had said the magic word, snacks. I am thinking that we need cake because it's a celebration, but I'm thinking that instead of the sweet jam that you usually put in pastries, what if we made strudel with rhubarb and green apples? Then topped it with whipped cream. Lotus frowned. Would that be good? Maybe it could be. Over the next 3 hours, Lotus and Ray made a dozen different variations on sour and savory versions of pastries, including some pulled pork steamed buns that turned out really well. Hawk was really looking forward to those. They were visually the same as sweets, but with meat in them. He hadn't realized yet that they weren't sweet in any way, just a convenient way of eating pulled pork on the move. But it was a new recipe for Ray and Lotus. Now that she was awake, Opal found that she easily got bored, so she ended up creating illusions to do all sorts of things around the tiny world. Some helped Ray and Lotus cook, some tidied the house, and when that wasn't enough distraction, she prepared an outdoor amphitheater to put on a play. The latest episode of The Noble Knight Thor and His Companions was a huge hit with the group, who generously overlooked the parts where she heavily embellished reality to make it more interesting. After all, they couldn't very well have scenes where the hero of the story was simply standing on the sidelines or clearing out trash mobs while others did the real work. There was no harm in adding in a few more impressive enemies to the story. You've got yourself a reliable cheerleader. Dana joked as they finished the show. Thor nodded happily. Sister Opal had done a wonderful job with the production of the latest episode of his memoir. He was greatly looking forward to the next one. Ray lounged back on one of the stone benches of the illusionary theater and popped a pastry in her mouth. Sweet and sour pastries were a great idea. It was a good thing that they made hundreds of these today because she was adding them to the usual snack rotation. But now that they had celebrated her advancement and watched a movie, she was getting curious about what might be hiding out in the wilderness around them. She was a totem-ranked predator now, and there shouldn't be many things that she couldn't hunt. But maybe there was? Just the chance that there was still something around that might manage to escape from her or put up a real fight was exhilarating. So, as everyone settled in for another night of meditation or rest, she snuck out of the tiny world and got the Naga bodyguards to update her on the situation outside. There wasn't much coming close to them there, but there were some powerful monsters in the distance that Rei might be able to play with. They couldn't tell what it was, but they could sense the powerful auras. Rei activated Night Haunter and went to see what she could find. Her new body was incredibly powerful, and Rei found that she could run nearly as fast as Naksha could fly. Faster than even the buses of the Golden Dragon Nation. It was an incredible feeling, and in mere minutes she had found the dangerous creatures that the Naga had sensed, but they weren't prey. Just orcs. But the orcs weren't a total loss. Hey, I'm bored. Anyone want a brawl to first blood? I will wager 2 bags of rice that I win. She shouted from the edge of their camp in humanoid form. Chapter 1025, Good Trades. When everyone else woke up for the morning, Rei was in a wonderful mood. Not only did she get her fight, she also managed to get a good trade out of the orcs. After she won a flute carved from monster bones in the first fight and an antler-handled dagger in the second, she managed to trade the orcs the rice she brought as a wager for a necklace made of sandmouse skulls. She was currently wearing it to annoy Hawk. To him, mice were nothing more than food. But Rei found that the small skulls made wonderful accessories. The orcs even gave them war paint and stuck shiny stones in the eye sockets. Did you get your power level stabilized? Carl asked as Rei sat down with them at breakfast. Rei nodded. Yeah, I went to stretch my legs a little last night. There is a group of orcs not too far away and they agreed to spar with me. That's where I got my new necklace. How big is the tribe? Should we go offer them a trade? Tessa asked. Rei shook her head. There are only like 20 of them with 2 totems. It's more of a hunting group than a full clan. I traded them 2 bags of rice for the necklace after the sparring match, and that will last them for weeks. Tessa nodded. Did you remember to ask them about monsters in the area? Rei smirked. What do you take me for? Of course I did. I even drew a map of all the spots that they found good fights and tasty things. Carl isn't the only one that is good at talking to orcs. The war cleric examined the map, then passed it to Carl and Thor, who would be the only ones outside as they traveled. Hawk went to scout, and Rei activated Night Haunter and transformed into her natural form before taking a seat in the cargo area at the back of the wagon. That way she could watch the scenery pass in comfort. If there was something dangerous enough that they could sense her, they should be dissuaded from attacking by the fact that both her and Carl were outside the tiny world. Where are we headed? Lotus asked from the window of the carriage as Thor began to move. Hawk found a whole group of sand howlers from a monster spawn. I thought we should start the day off by eliminating the truly dangerous creatures. They have a few totems with them, but the group is mostly overlords. A bit over-level, but I have a theory that this is actually the fastest way to push everyone to advance. Carl informed her. Lotus retreated into the carriage and Thor trotted happily across the hard grass. The monsters were confirmed to be from a spawn, so he just had to head in their direction and they would attack. That gave him plenty of time to prepare, as Hawk already knew where they were. Nothing had really changed with his tactics, but Thor had some new ideas on how to look epic while they were in battle. After all, what was the point of being a behemoth if you couldn't look impressive? Carl tried not to laugh at Thor's plans, which mostly revolved around ending charges and defensive maneuvers with impressive poses without putting himself out of position for the next move. 500 meters. Everyone, get ready. Carl called into the carriage as Thor slowed to a stop so he could put the wagon away before the battle. The ladies piled out of the carriage and Rei made preparations for the battle. With her pair of golems out and then the undead army of spectral knights, she had a full force ready. She was still incorporeal, but the summoned force would be enough to terrify the sand howlers. Carl advanced on the sand howlers while Rei led her group to flank the right side. That put everyone else on the left as the few totems in the swarm moved to engage what looked like the largest threat. Rei's summon team. Once they got close, Carl called on his bodyguards and brought out the Haint so she could fight alongside the epic guard. The two looked a lot alike, and they had a similar fighting style, so they worked well together. If they needed to, they could merge to increase their power level, but that was unlikely to be necessary now that Carl was at totem rank and the strongest enemies had all diverted to the side of the group where Rei was attacking. The Yeti-like sand howlers made a wailing noise like the sound of an incoming sandstorm. That was how they had gotten their name, but they were also skilled in sand magic and they were forming their own sandy blizzard to reduce visibility. Normally, that would also be a deadly area spell. But with the epic guard putting Void Body on the group, they could simply ignore the damage from the spell and work around the limited sight restrictions. However, Ophelia was not impressed with this sort of enemy. She would be shaking sand out of her fur for days. That didn't stop her from fighting, though. The sand howlers were an intelligent enemy, and even with Dana's golems, they were still heavily outnumbered and the creatures were determined to outflank and encircle them. Fortunately, Remy had joined their side and her bodyguards could hold the back of their formation while Remy herself was in the middle, throwing lightning at them. At least, she was for the first minute before realizing that lightning magic didn't work particularly well against these creatures. Fire didn't either, though not to the same degree of resistance, but water turned them to a soggy mess and cut through their fur much more effectively than either of the other elemental effects that they had tried so far. The fur that was so effective at protecting against the lightning and fire elements effectively trapped the water on their bodies and increased the lingering damage that they were taking. A victory for Remy. Chapter 1026, Clearing Sandhowlers. Dana smiled as she watched her golems parry the attacks of the Sandhowlers. The creatures hadn't landed a single strike on the golems yet, and the greater golems had moved to protect the side opposite Tessa and Thor. But Dana realized there might be a better way to do this. If she shifted the golems who had gained her increased attack speed and auto parry, she could put the greater golems between them, and then both the damage and defensive capabilities would be balanced across the whole section of the battle they were responsible for. The Sandhowlers weren't particularly fast, and they were large. So, only 3 of them could engage each golem at a time. That was enough that the stone summons were mostly on the defensive. But they were still managing to land a few attacks of their own without relying on Dana. Her newest attack skills were all flower-themed for some reason, with names like Piercing Rose Thorns and Plum Blossom Slash. But they were every bit as powerful as spells with more dignified sorts of names. If she didn't know better, she would think that the system was messing with her and giving her skills with names that she would be embarrassed to say out loud. Nevertheless, they smoothly cut through the thick fur of the Sandhowlers, and every strike left lingering damage from her new poison skill, Toxic Beauty. She really had been scammed by this Mystic Blade masterclass. The part that annoyed her the most was that it really was as good as she had hoped, and she had even gained the ability to control her Blade Swarm skill to the point that she could engage a dozen opponents at a time just with the magical blades. As she fought, she could feel her mind beginning to expand. Each blade, each summon was a separate train of thought. And the more that she used them, the more natural it became. Dana briefly considered that this level of class might actually be on par with what Carl had if her physique was the same. But as he had Kara on his side, his anti-magic capabilities made him a hard counter to all sorts of mage classes, no matter how powerful. If he couldn't just nullify her attacks, Dana was certain that she should be a match for nearly any other overlord. She activated Plum Blossom Slash and sent a wave of razor-sharp petals into the Sandhowlers, tearing into them and driving back in attempt to get behind her formation. Carl has nearly dealt with the totems already. Tessa informed the others from her raised vantage point on Thor's back. Dana laughed, of course he had. Between Carl and Ray, there was little doubt that they would be able to tear through a 10-on-2 battle as if the enemies were made of paper. As the number of Sandhowlers dropped, Tessa and Thor moved to herd them into a smaller group where area skills would do more damage. They had multiple area damage effects, and if they could keep the Sandhowlers close enough, they would all be taking continuous holy damage. Dana shifted the golems and her epic guard around the other side, encircling the last dozen Sandhowlers in a full reversal of the early part of the fight. Then, Ray was there, all stabbing limbs and flying blood, and the Sandhowlers were dead. Ray dipped her front half in what Dana took as a nod of satisfaction, and the spider's army of summoned creatures finally caught up to the battle. None of them could use Shadow Step, so they had to actually run across the battlefield. Ray didn't have that much patience. Carl jogged over and checked the bodies using Soul Sight to ensure there were no survivors faking their death. All right, Hawk has found more targets for us. Did we want to keep going, or does anyone need a rest? It will take about 15 minutes to get there. Carl asked. If we're in the carriage, that's more than enough time to recover. Tessa agreed. I need a snack. Fighting makes me hungry. Thor added in Carl's mind. All right, I will have my golems pull the carriage and everyone else can rest. That way we're all fresh for the next fight. There is only one totem leading the group this time, but there will be a lot more royal rank enemies to deal with instead of overlords. He explained. Tessa hopped down and Thor returned to his space to eat. It was the one inconvenient part of being a behemoth. His appetite was much larger than when he was a Cero, and his body was still growing rapidly. Thor wasn't quite clear on how large he was going to get, but the name suggested that he would be something close to dragon-sized when he was finished. If he had thought to ask Remy, he would have gotten the full answer. The impenetrable bulwark behemoth never stopped growing. But they got better at reducing their size over time so that they could maintain a more manageable size and not eat themselves out of a home. The larger they were, the greater their appetite, and the oldest of the behemoths dwarfed even the ancient dragons in pure size. Carl called on a pair of dire bears and Ray made them a harness to pull the carriage, which was quite the sight. The 2 bears harnessed together in a row for more output was overkill, given that they didn't even have trade goods in the carriage. But it looked impressive, and the spell summoned 2 of them anyhow. They started moving across the soft ground, and Carl realized that while they were out of the swamps, the lower areas were still very wet and muddy. That was going to be a problem for traveling, but they could make flotation adapters for the carriage wheels easily enough, and the totem-ranked bears were capable of simply dragging the carriage through any depth of mud. As long as the carriage held up to the abuse. Chapter 1027, More Howlers. The second group was also Sandhowlers, but less powerful ones from the same spawn. Hawk, do you see the source of the spawn? Carl asked. I think that it might be gone. Look closely at them, some of these have a lot of old damage on them. I think that they've been out here for months or more. Hawk replied. If that was the case, it would make sense that the origin anomaly was long gone. The changing terrain of the inner regions of Gabble actually explained a lot of the issues that they were having closer to the shoreline. The monsters changed with the changes in terrain, so even if they cleared out all the ones that were coming out and then went across the whole country in a wave of destruction, as soon as things changed, they would have to start over. The best that they could hope for was to keep them contained to the central areas. But there were said to be system stones or something equivalent to them in the middle of the nation, and Carl was hopeful that they might actually manage to find them if they could find the center of the region that was being altered. A couple or 10,000 years without maintaining a defensive illusion might be enough to cause this chaos, assuming it was powerful enough. Opal shook sparkles from her wings in excitement. Yes, that could happen if you upgraded illusionary domain to something that would affect the real world. Her illusionary world could get a bit out of control as it was, since she created beings with an approximation of intelligence and free will. Left unsupervised, they would often do strange things, and she would have to add further instructions to keep them from changing too much. That was why she didn't put dwarves in the illusionary world at the guild house. If she left them unsupervised, they would renovate the whole city, and she would have to either learn the new layout or change it all back. Both would be chaos for the guild members who worked in the area, like the alchemists. The orcs are coming our way, Hawk warned when the group was almost to the Sandhowlers. We've got incoming orcs and a fight. Everyone get ready, they might want to compete. Carl warned. The orcs turned toward their group, so Carl altered course to meet them instead of the monsters. Well met, chieftain. Carl shouted as the orcs approached. Totem Carl, well met. Are you hunting Sandhowlers for fur blankets? The largest of the orcs asked. Blankets? No, we have plenty. We're hunting them for fun and because it makes the black dragon happy to bring the monster numbers back to balance. The orc laughed at Carl's explanation. Well, if that is the case, would you like to have your people and mine compete? We can deal with the totem and then our clans can see who gets more pelts. Carl nodded. Ray, go collect the totem's body and bring it back to us so the others can start their challenge. The orc looked confused for a few seconds until Ray reappeared with a decapitated Sandhowler. It had taken all her tricks to ambush that thing, and her golems had punched a half-dozen holes in the front before she cut the head off from behind. But it worked fast enough to impress the orcs. There aren't more totems in your group, are there? The chieftain asked. Carl shook his head. Just the two of us, but we have some powerful overlords. The orc shrugged. Powerful overlords were good counterparts for his tribe, and his orcs had many more people. Not more overlords, but more combatants capable of dealing with royal-rank Sandhowlers. The ladies got out of the carriage, and the chieftain smiled. Oh, you have a good group. Red, black, and green dragon priestesses. Though I see that they have all managed to advance their classes. Yes, this should be a good fight. Then Kara came out to join the fun, and the orcs began to look confused. What is that? It looks like a void badger, but with wings. The chieftain asked. She was originally a winged void badger, but she managed to enter an instance and evolved into a chaos badger. Carl explained. The chieftain nodded slowly. I suppose there really are things beyond our comprehension in this world. To think that an apex predator could evolve even further. You have powerful friends, Totem Carl. A blood destruction spider, that chaos badger, a naga queen, a behemoth, multiple dragon clerics, and a black dragon, plus a blade master. Then the orc did a double take. Oh, I am sorry, Miss Ophelia. I thought that you were another summoned assistant like the dire bears. I didn't notice your name right away. That was something that Carl realized he really should do. Keeping the system interface active would let him know who around him was illusionary or created by a spell without using soul sight. Soul sight didn't fail him often, but redundant scouting methods were best. The Sandhowlers were already running at them, so the chieftain stopped speaking and motioned for his team to engage. Ladies, you're free to engage. Whichever team gets more pelts wins the fight. The three totems will sit out the fight unless you get in trouble. Carl explained. Tessa laughed. There were dozens of orcs here, all eager for a fight. The Sandhowlers were the ones in danger, not them. But Dana rolled her eyes. Always a reason to slack off. She joked. I will get started on the setup for the feast after the battle. Carl offered. Make plenty of tables. It looks like even the kids want to get in on this challenge. She agreed. She wasn't joking. Even the commander rank orcs in their teen years were taking out blades and joining teams of more powerful warriors. The only ones remaining behind were the pregnant women and the small children. Even an ancient-looking old shaman woman was hobbling toward the fight with her cane. Chapter 1028, Surplus Pig Roast. Carl smiled at the chieftain. Those must be some good blankets. The very finest ones that you can find. Sandhowler fur is resistant to both cold and heat, durable and self-cleaning. If you shake it, everything falls off. It doesn't even hold scents. Maybe they should keep a few of them, Carl thought. A few fur blankets would be an acceptable stylistic counterpart to the silk comforters that Ray made. Plus, they could make cloaks out of them the way that they had with the cut-down frost giant capes during their early battles. Ray thought that was a brilliant idea and began cleaning the totem so that she could stretch and tan it in her space. Did you need the bodies for anything? They don't smell like they would taste good. Carl asked. The orc shrugged. They don't. But we feed them to the livestock and the bones are good for making tools and such. Waste not, want not. Carl nodded and gestured to the remains of the one on the ground. In that case, you can have the rest of that one. We don't have an artisan who specializes in bone art. The roomcrafters could make items from bone, but they had plenty already and they were too far from the guild store to send items directly there from here. The chief nodded in acceptance, then shook his head in dismay as he realized that Hawk had started bombarding the area with meteors. It had turned the group of sand howlers into a war zone, with artillery explosions raining down among them and driving them into the two forces at the edges of their ranks. Instead of planning a proper attack, the monsters were simply charging at the enemy, trying to escape the deadly rain. But Hawk hadn't forgotten the assignment. While he was dropping spells on them, he had reduced the temperature of the fire enough that it wouldn't singe the fur. They were supposed to be collecting pelts, so he couldn't destroy them all. Carl did notice that his meteors weren't the same as Remy's. Hers were actual stones. Hawk's were simply balls of magical energy, like a solid ball of rend. Hey, look over there. That is a great weapon. Tian cheered, directing Carl's attention to his left. One of the orcs had made a blowgun and was using it to fire a poison skill at the sand howlers. Tian wasn't interested in poison, but that tube would be great for firing stones at enemies. I will make you one later with runes on it to improve the function. If you fire stones through one like that, it will be just as good as using your skill directly, Carl informed the little fox. Carl watched as a sand howler leapt over Thor's back, headed for Tessa, who was transformed into her fully scaled dragonkin form for battle. But the outcome was not what he expected. Tessa casually swung her shield, shattering the creature's skull and sending the body flying dozens of meters away without interrupting the skill that she was using with her other hand. When she had advanced to become a dragon crusader, she had gained a skill called Compliance, and it appeared that the physique improvement was no joke. Compliance creates an area of oppression 10 meters per user rank and grants the dragon crusader the physique of a red dragon at their own rank. It would certainly take draconic strength to toss a 200-kilo sand howler like a rag doll. The chieftain smiled at Carl. The women of your clan are fearsome. Carl shrugged. And this is when they are in a good mood. The chieftain laughed, and a few of the pregnant women watching the kids snorted in amusement. A blast of black mist flowed over the battle from Naksha, who had been fighting in human form, and nearly half of the remaining sand howlers simply dropped dead. The chief sighed. It seems to be our loss. There aren't enough of them left for us to catch up. The dragon does not play fair. He didn't seem to actually be upset by the outcome, but Carl knew that was mostly because the ladies had been well ahead of the orcs even before Naksha had used dragon breath. Are you just here to hunt monsters for the black dragon? One of the Orcish ladies asked as the last of the sand howlers were eliminated. Carl shook his head. No, we're also looking for the Great Temple, though it might be known by another name. The location of the lost system stones. We have reason to think that they might be active again and able to be found. The woman excitedly got to her feet. It is said that there might be a fragment of the lost dragon scale there as well. Finding the scale has been the dream of all orcs for generations beyond record. Carl smiled. Indeed it has. I originally come from another continent where the orcs relocated to in search of the scale. They believe that they are close to locating it now, but they never gave up on the search. The woman looked proud of her people's perseverance. It had been thousands of years, but they kept their oath to find the lost scale fragment. If rumors were to be believed, the whole thing might have been a prank by Supreme Lady Matilda. But Carl strongly suspected that he was actually in possession of the scale fragment. The more energy they poured into the scale that Hawk had recovered from the capital, the more that it resembled a broken version of the legendary world dragon scale that the system's core was formed from. With the battle ended, the counting began. The outcome was clear, but the precise numbers were important to the record-keeping of the orcs. Whether they won or lost, the combat capability of their tribe and how it compared to others they met was vitally important information. Now, how do you feel about a pig roast? We have a slight surplus of royal rank boars. Carl asked. Maybe two. I collected too many of those ones. Hawk agreed. A pig roast sounds wonderful. But we should start setting up the tables we promised before the ladies get back. The chieftain agreed. Tian? Can we get tables and benches, please? Simple stone is fine. Chapter 1029, All events are food events. Tian had enough seating for everyone made in a matter of seconds, along with a large fire pit with a rotating spit for the giant boars that Hawk wanted to get rid of. Your people are generous in victory. The chieftain noted, and Carl chuckled. Nobody wants to celebrate a defeat, and we've got good reason to celebrate lately. One of the ladies just made it to the overlord rank recently, and soon the others are likely to join her. If they can keep up that pace, we will be celebrating for a year. The chief nodded in agreement. Overlord was an important advancement, as it was so uncommon for most species to make it to totem rank. If they could just advance to totem without any issues, the Orcish tribes would dominate the region and not be relegated to nomads. To the north of here, the trolls are doing the same. They just got a new village chief successor at totem rank a month ago. He explained. Are they easy to get along with? Carl asked. As much as trolls ever are. They are currently led by an aging shaman who remembers the old ways, so we don't have any issues. But the younger generation is different. They have ideas about isolating the tribes from other species. Even the orcs don't do that. Just because we don't trade for things that we can make ourselves doesn't mean that we don't wish to interact with others. The chief explained. If you didn't interact with others, how would you know how strong your kids were? Comparing them only to each other doesn't give you a good measure of their progress. Carl agreed. See, you understand. If you don't watch how others are doing, you can fall behind without ever knowing it. The orcs and the ladies started to gather as they returned from the battlefield, and Lotus began to show off her advanced food creation skills. When she got the Nature's Friend class, she had gotten even better food creation skills, and now she could make wine directly without waiting for the process. That skill was very popular among the orcs, who also brewed berry wines of their own. As she explained it, fermentation was a natural process and making the ingredients was simple. So it was only natural that her skills would advance to making wine, mead, and other alcohol. That could become a disaster for many nature clerics with their notorious lack of self-control, but Lotus was never a heavy drinker and actually preferred the fruit juice to the wine. But the wine was a big hit among the orcs, as it went well with roast pork, which was on the spit now and being helped in the cooking process by a healthy dose of fire magic that increased the temperature of the whole carcass without burning the outside. They didn't have all night for the food to cook, but the Orc's chefs were good at the trick. They had practiced it all their lives, as the clan hated to wait for food and they rarely set up camp long enough before a battle to begin the celebratory feast. Plus, if they spent all that time cooking, they wouldn't be able to join the fight. You couldn't leave all the cooking to whoever happened to be injured or pregnant enough that they had to be excluded from the battle. Some orcs just couldn't cook. Tessa added the traditional rice and beans, but spiced heavily the way that the orcs and demons liked it. Now they had a proper feast. Unlike many of the orcs that lived in Drod, this tribe didn't look like it put much time and effort into decorative or entertainment items. They did have a large drum that they set up for the dance, but that was it. It was enough, Carl supposed. The orcs were happy to dance to the beat, as were Lotus and Ophelia. So it didn't really matter if they were all dancing in their armor. This really was Lotus' time to shine, Carl decided. She had transformed into the Tree of Life and was happily dancing along, shaking golden dust from her branches while the blue healing birds fluttered around the camp, periodically diving into someone to heal hidden injuries. The orcs loved the show as the afternoon sun made the golden dust sparkle, and this tribe was particularly easily entertained. They were just winding down the party when the ground began to shake and everyone was suddenly on guard again. I don't recognize this. Do you what it is? Carl asked as the orcs prepared for battle. The chieftain nodded. This is fairly common. There is something underground in this region, and every so often the ground simply opens up and spits out monsters, then closes again. That was not how Carl remembered anomalies working at all. Could it be the result of anomalies underground? As Carl recalled, the dwarves had said that the anomalies didn't form underground. They had never had one in the dwarven cities, they always happened on the surface of the mountains, not inside them. So this had to be something else. Maybe it really was related to the missing system stones? It wouldn't shock Carl if it was. Most of the unexplained things in the world were somehow system-related. So, if there was some sort of underground monster spawn trapped here, or perhaps a stable portal underground, it would explain the monsters trying to escape. Or, they could be in an illusion and the monsters were actually already there and just broke through the spell. Both were possible, but Carl didn't know enough about what was going on in the region to really understand what was simply possible and what was actually likely. Hawk was in the air scouting. But so far, he hadn't seen anything. It is shaking the ground, but it isn't shaking the air. Earthquakes should shake the air, I can tell when a hard impact hit the ground nearby. Hawk complained. Kara agreed. Earthquakes would shake the air. But when she flew even a single meter high, she couldn't feel any disturbance from the shaking ground, and that wasn't right. Chapter 1030, Narazir Zone. So, if she could feel it on the ground but not in the air, in Kara's mind that meant it was likely a trick. And tricks of magic could be nullified. Kara cast Nullify and the air seemed to distort for a moment, which encouraged her to recruit assistance. Carl, help me out here. I think that we're standing on something good. She insisted. The chieftain recognized the spell right away when Carl started casting. If it didn't work, then there was no harm, but if this strange adventurer could prevent a disaster from occurring near them with a nullification spell, that would be an even larger cause for celebration. With both Carl and Kara working, the distortions in the air began to increase, as did the mana load as they worked to overcome the spell. It was obviously higher level than either of them, but the spell felt unstable. Carl had to continually adjust his nullification as parts of the spell would dissolve and reform, like the spell was collapsing on its own but being maintained by someone on the other side. Or something. Finally, the distortion increased to the point that they could clearly see that there was an ancient stone building all around them. That was cause for the orcs to cheer and begin a new song on the drum. This song made the distortion in the air even stronger and the temple clearer. It had to be a form of bardic magic, Carl thought. Then, the world twisted and they found themselves standing next to the temple looking out over fields of long grass filled with domestic animals. They hadn't broken the illusion, they had thrown themselves through it. Head count? Carl and the chieftain demanded at the same time. It was quickly determined that everyone was here. Even the summoned bodyguards had been brought along with them. I don't think that we moved. One of the Orc's shamans announced after a few minutes of verification. The sun is in the same spot and will set in the same spot as expected. So we are near the same latitude on the same day of the year. He added. Remy agreed. It was more likely that they had moved through time than space, but she had no way of measuring that. However, they were not alone. Welcome. A gentle voice asked hesitantly, clearly unsure what to make of the sudden arrivals. The chieftain poked Carl, who turned to face the new voice. A young woman in a dark-light host tabard stood in front of them, looking nervous. Good evening. Sorry about the sudden intrusion. It appears that a magical anomaly decided we should be here today. My name is Carl, and it's a pleasure to meet you, Mira. Then Carl activated his armor spell to display his guild tabard, and the young human woman smiled. Normally, I would ask what brings you here today, but if you weren't coming here intentionally, I suppose I will need a new greeting. Welcome to the Narazir Zone Way Station number 42. The Temple of the Old Gods does not have any proper clergy in attendance, but we have renovated it to provide lodging for travelers if you would like to rest for the evening. It was clear that the temple would not hold an entire clan of orcs, but Carl and the chieftain as well as the shaman would definitely be interested in checking it out anyhow. Would you mind giving us a tour? I suspect that this location might have something to do with our current predicament. Possibly a magical relic that resonates with one of our members. Carl suggested. The woman nodded. Of course. Well, the parts that are accessible. The majority of the basement levels of the temple collapsed long ago, and the location is a historical site, so we didn't try to excavate and renovate them. The chieftain smiled but turned to Carl with a confused look. I can't understand her, he whispered. That seemed like solid evidence that the system functions were not working properly here. Carl could understand her, but she was human, so they were likely speaking the same language. But Carl could still understand the orc, so their own functions weren't impacted. She offered us a tour. Just follow my lead and I will have someone translate. In her reduced spirit snake form, Remy slithered up Carl's side to his shoulder, giving herself a good perch to see from. If they couldn't understand Orcish, they likely didn't understand Serpent either. The woman smiled and nodded politely to Remy, recognizing her as a transformed Naga queen, then gestured toward the temple. Ophelia gestured for the others to go. I will stay here with Thor and the others, you can go ahead with the priestesses. She explained. If the locals couldn't speak Orcish, someone needed to stay nearby, or there could be a major incident simply due to a misunderstanding and lack of translators. The woman at the temple still had a Darklight Host Guild membership and a nameplate with the system, so she had a class. But that only made misunderstandings more dangerous. The sudden arrival of an entire orc clan had also attracted attention, and the nearby farmers were watching them with great interest as they went about their days. Orcs didn't necessarily have the best reputation thanks to their love of a good fight. So it wouldn't be out of the question for the locals to think that they might have gotten bored and decided to go raiding. After all, if the fight didn't come to you, you could go and pick a fight. But the real question was, where and when had they ended up? There was no temple at this location in either of the versions of the region that they had seen so far. It was in the zone that Hawk had scouted both before and after the change, so it would certainly have been noticed among the completely wild and uninhabited region. Only neither of those words described what they were seeing now. This was clearly all farmland of various sorts, and there was a massive stone temple. Chapter 1031, Temple Tour. Inside the temple, Carl walked beside their escort while the Orcish chieftain was a step behind, with Tessa at his side to whisper translations and notes about things that the locals didn't notice anymore. When you saw carving every day of your life, it was nothing remarkable. But when the carving was dedicated to a god that a dragon cleric who had spent years learning about the various pantheons couldn't identify, it was important to them. This was once a temple to the old gods, the ones forgotten by time or replaced by the younger gods. Many of their stories were said to be brought to this world by the outreach programs of the Darklight Host when they spread through the world, but from what I can tell in the temple, the guild didn't actually have any connection to the faith, unless there were members of the faithful among the guild membership. See here? This is a statue of the god of magic, Carl. The one I would assume that you were named after. It shows him in simple black robes, almost as if he were a follower of the Black Dragon, but the placard underneath is mithril, unaffected by time, and clearly details a simple prayer to the god of magic. Their guide explained. Remy called her bodyguard into her space and had them make notes of all the inscriptions and other writings that they found in the temple. Even if they couldn't read it right now, it could be valuable information later. Like for Brother Tian. He would probably want a temple to the beast gods, but he had a lot of magical power, so there might be some merit in saying nice things to the god of magic. It wasn't just human gods either. There was a beastkin death god with wolf ears and a man in a faceless mask listed as the laughing god. Well, that one might be human, though as they were supposed to be the god of luck, practical jokes and fate, their appearance might be ambiguous. A happy squeal let them know that they had lost Lotus as the priestess was rapidly disappearing down a side hallway as Mira laughed. Oh, she must have noticed already. We would have gotten there in a few minutes. The hallway that the green dragon cleric vanished down leads to the altar to the god of life and fertility. A bunny. Tessa laughed out loud, then translated for the chieftain, who gave an indulgent look as he turned toward the hallway Lotus had taken. Naksha motioned for them to keep going. I will keep the little one out of trouble. The presence of the dragon gods is also strong here, and I am certain she won't damage anything. Thank you. We will be along in a few minutes. Carl agreed. Mira gave him a curious look. You and the other clerics I can see, as you represent the beast and dragon gods, but how did your entourage end up traveling with a whole clan of orcs? Are they here to represent the war god? Carl shook his head. We were actually just finishing a fight alongside them, a challenge to see who could eliminate more of an anomaly-afflicted and overpopulated sand howler tribe when there was a magical distortion. It deposited us here. We weren't traveling together before that. Mira sighed and twisted her hair up into a loose bun. Things have gotten strange since the system started to recede. I have heard that many regions have been troubled by insane monsters in the past few years, but that's more of an urban legend. The fact that you're here describing the issue firsthand means it's true, doesn't it? But more concerning is that I have heard many of the younger guild members have failed to access the class change menu on time. They're getting stuck at their base class. She explained. When did the translation feature stop working in this region? Carl asked. Translation feature? You can read these inscriptions? Mira asked, startled. Well, yes. But I meant spoken. You clearly don't speak Orcish and they can't understand you. However, they can understand me. Carl explained. That's because you speak Orcish. Mira reminded him. Carl shook his head. That's the system. It's helping me with the translation. I have never studied Orcish a day in my life, but I still understand them and they understand me. Does that mean you hear it as me speaking Orcish when I talk to them? Mira nodded. And Serpent when you speak to the Naga Queen or the Black Dragon. The Lady Naksha answers in human common, which is strange as you spoke to her in Serpent. Tessa frowned. We have run into this before. When we were traveling through Nubon. The trolls and orcs understood you just fine, but everyone else had issues. So they were facing the opposite of what he had seen at home. The system was receding and they were losing access to everything, one feature at a time. Back on topic, has the system never translated for you? Carl asked. Mira shook her head. No, everyone just speaks the common language to each other. The Darklight host and the Dragon Gods both run schools to teach the language, plus literacy skills, to children. What branch are you from anyhow? The Drod City branch. Carl replied casually. Mira nodded. Oh, on the southeastern island. That makes sense. Though, I was shocked to hear that you had been to other continents. Or is there a Nubon somewhere in the Dragon Isles? Carl shook his head. No, it is on the Kaptumia continent. As far as I know, there isn't another nation by the same name. Mira snapped her fingers. That's it. I just realized why you traveled so much. The portal is still active between the Demon Temple in Drod City and the Beastkin Temple next to the Great Lake, isn't it? So, you can just use the platform to move between continents. Carl smiled. I can also use the portal spell. So, I can move between continents once I have been there once. Mira sighed. That must be nice. Being the only one stationed here gets so lonely. There were supposed to be replacements coming, but I've been having issues with the system messaging function lately and I don't know when they're going to arrive. Chapter 1032, Contact the Guild. Carl pulled up the system interface and looked at the guild interface. Guild members active I-9, 99+. Guild rank War Champion. Full guild privileges granted A. Guild branches in range 12. What branch are you from? If they're in range, I can send a message for you and hope that someone receives it. Carl suggested. All the others silently checked their interfaces at the same time. They were all Darklight host members, but they hadn't thought to see if they could interact with the guild in a while since the only members were them plus Supreme Lady Matilda and the two under her branch, which now included Tiffany and one other. We've been here before. This timeline. This is just before I met you for the first time. Kara announced. She had been watching random events in her precognition spell mirror and just happened to see their current activities, which came with a basic time reference. It might be off by a few years or a decade, but it should be close. Well, this should be interesting. Everything really was shutting down at this point, and it would be a very long time before they came back online again. Carl informed her. Yeah, Spicy Dragon agrees that it's going to be fun to have us here. Wait, what? Carl asked. Oh, I messaged her once I realized we found a fun place. We keep each other up to date on new developments. Kara explained. And as they were thousands of years into the past, this would have been the first time that the two had spoken to each other. But apparently Supreme Lady Matilda had just rolled with the flow and didn't question what Kara was talking about. Or she might have already foreseen this event and wasn't shocked. It was hard to tell with the Chaos Dragon. Carl sent off a guild message hoping that someone would reply. I am at the 42nd Narazir Zone way station. There is only one guild member here waiting for replacement members who are overdue. Does anyone know their status? There was a long pause, then a return message came to him. Who is this and how did you reactivate the guild messaging function? Tell Mira to retreat to the Kazdila guild house. The outposts have been abandoned and the guild functions are failing fast. Narazir is completely lost, she is the last active member there as far as we can tell. But tell her to stay away from the troll armies. They're waging war to take Narazir as their own and the dwarves have retreated below ground. World Dragon be with you, War Champion. This might be the last message I can send. The name on the message was corrupted, showing as incomprehensible symbols and there were multiple corrupted characters, but Carl managed to translate it well enough. Well, hopefully. If they meant somewhere other than Kazdila, he might be sending Mira on an adventure in the wrong direction. This is War Champion Carl. Be safe and keep trying with the system functions. There are still many guild members who have no idea what is happening. After a minute there was no reply, so Carl had no way to know if the message had even been received. But he had gotten enough information to at least relay to their guide. Mira, I got a message through. I don't know who sent the reply, but they said to go to Kazdila. Apparently the trollish armies are taking Narazir as a trollish nation and the dwarves have moved underground. The guild functions are apparently failing fast, so they're calling everyone to the guild houses. As far as they can tell, you're the last guild member in the region. Mira laughed. 1,000 kilometers through the wilderness while the trolls are at war. Not only that, but I'll have to cross the east wall, and that means the active war zone unless I go way out into the wilderness and stay away from the cities. I think that if the system is collapsing that fast, it might be better if I just stay here. I might not be much of a cleric, but I am a cleric, and the farmers rely on the Darklight host for emergencies. If the armies show up, the farmers should protect me. I've been here for 5 years now, and I know everyone. The trolls don't need much healing, but I help with childbirth and nature magic for the crops. If Kara was right, and this was the same time when he found her, the system was still going strong close to home. The Divine Beast Nation had no problem keeping guild functions active, but that was halfway around the world. So, it might not be long before the issue spread. Carl considered sending a message to Orthos, the Bronze Dragon. But if it was before he became the war champion of Bunga, that might just cause unnecessary confusion. Orthos was on his list of friends in the system interface and showed as active, so the dragon was definitely alive and a member of the guild. Carl wasn't sure when or how anyone got added to the friends list, but there were a startling number of people on it. City lords, generals, some innkeepers, and people they had gone to dungeons with. Most were showing as inactive, but the members of his group and the 2 ancient dragons were all showing as available for messages. Mira gestured further into the temple. Now that we've sorted out my future plans, should we finish the tour and go rescue the black dragon from the enthusiasm of a green dragon cleric who just found a shrine to the bunny god? Carl nodded. Yes, let's see the rest of the temple. There is a lot of history hidden in here, and my team is making notes so that none of it is forgotten if something should happen to the building during the unrest. Mira laughed and shook her head. I can't see the army caring about the building itself. If anything, the locals might tear it down to do home improvements once I am gone. The old gods aren't the troll gods. Or, most of them aren't. There are some shrines to the troll shaman gods in here. Chapter 1033, So Many Shrines. Mira led them through the temple, pointing out each of the small rooms or sometimes just a vestibule that was dedicated to each god. Whoever built this was very unification-minded, weren't they? They went out of their way to ensure that there were shrines to every species gods on the main floor. Tessa noted. Mira laughed. It was made by the Darklight host, of course. The top 2 floors are made for guest rooms, the basement is a reinforced shelter, and there is an outbuilding for giant species. Most of the way stations are nothing more than an overnight stopping point, with some nature-aligned guild members to provide food and water for travelers. But this one is truly ancient and it was built around the existing temple. As the historical records go, they found the statues dumped here from a destroyed shrine, or a lot of them. So, they stood them up, found out who the more obscure ones were, and built a new temple to all of the gods who look over this world. At one point, this was part of a royal retreat and it was supposed to have a strong enough connection to the gods that it could help with system class advancements. But if my guild messaging isn't working, I would say that time is long past. Personally, I suspect that the removal of the royal treasures is the cause. There was a rumor that they had a set of relic stones in the treasures and that was the source of the temple's divinity. But I suspect that it was something more incredible than that because the relic stones are actually still in the basement floor and they've been inactive for the last 1,000 years. I read the caretaker's journal entry from the time when they went inactive. Carl and Tessa turned to stare at each other. They had found the lost system stones entirely accidentally. Tessa whispered the translation to the Orcish chieftain who looked pleased but not too concerned about the stones. Those weren't the goal of the orcs. Ask her if she knows where the treasure went. He whispered. The chieftain would like to know if you are aware of the new location of the royal relics. He believes that there might be a relic of the Orcish clans there and they would like to trade to get it back. Carl explained. Mira nodded. They're at the royal temple of Shash under the supervision of the divine fire dragons. The kingdom that they belong to no longer exists, but the dragons like to protect historical relics of value. So, they collected them and put them into stasis storage. Tessa relayed the message and the chieftain smiled. This was the closest that his people had come to finding a solid lead on where the lost scale piece was. It was a long way to Shash, but it was on this island, so they could walk there eventually. The question was whether they would manage to get there before whatever strange anomaly had brought them to this place ended. It might be range limited or time limited. If it only lasted a few days, there was no way that they could walk thousands of kilometers to the Grand Temple. Can we see the floor with the relic stones? I would like to sketch it. Tessa requested. Of course, follow me down the stairs and I will show you. They're on the floor of the main basement room. Surprisingly, they haven't worn down at all in the time they've been inactive. They look as good as new, they just don't function. Mira explained. She led them down the stairs and into a large meeting room where hard-wooden chairs were arranged around a circle of golden stones on the floor. Carl smiled as he realized that he knew all these runes. At least the ones that were on top of the system stones. It wasn't some grand magical spell, it was the words to a prayer to the world dragon to grant them their heart's greatest desire. What do you think will happen if you speak the words? I mean, you got Avatar of the World Dragon for your skill thingy, right? Remy asked in Carl's mind. Carl's attention was drawn to his system interface just in case he had read the message incorrectly during his advancement. Patron deity detected a world dragon. Skill bonus confirmed avatar. The avatar of the world dragon may walk freely anywhere within the world dragon's influence. Increases resistance to negative statuses that impact movement and thought. Portal spell range limits increased. Yes, it was the world dragon that the system had identified as his patron deity. And the prayer was to the world dragon. So, in theory, he might be able to make the system stones work again. The repercussions of actually reactivating them after centuries of inactivity and during a downturn of the system when war and destruction were spreading wildly could be extremely unexpected. The monster species were asserting dominance now that the other species were losing access to the system and with it most of their power. Over the next few decades, as the shorter-lived species aged out of combat ability, the monster species would gain utter dominance of most of the world. Carl knew that from history both at home and from this continent. Most species still had some magic, but a lot of it was system-linked, and without the assistance of the system, only a fraction of the population was capable of gaining enough power to defend their people. In the Golden Dragon Nation and the other human nations, it was the Mage Towers. But even then, their influence was limited and most humans lived in hiding. The dwarves had retreated into their mountains and locked the doors behind them, but that wasn't unexpected. When all the problems were on the surface, the subterranean species would naturally want nothing to do with it. What Carl really wanted to know was if there was more magic hidden in these stones that he could replicate. If he could make a whole new set of system stones to send home or place in the courtyard of the guild house, he would become a living legend among the world dragon's followers. The man who granted class advancements as soon as you were qualified. Chapter 1034, Activate the Stones. Why don't you use that avatar skill and see if you can activate the stones? At least then we will know if there is more magic on them. Remy suggested. Did you forget what the avatar looks like? A totem-ranked world dragon will not fit in the basement of the temple. Carl reminded her. Oh, good point. Without the skill then, do you mind if I cast a spell to examine the stones? I would like to make a full record of the magic on them if possible. Carl requested. Half a continent was searching for these in his time. It was really only the orcs and the dragons who weren't trying to find them to either use or destroy them. But come to think of it, it was quite possible that the dragons had them in their possession the whole time and simply refused to tell anyone. Mira shrugged and gestured at the floor. If you think that you can actually examine those, you're welcome to it. The magic on them is under a divine seal. Many over the years have come here and tried to inspect them, but none have managed to learn anything about their usage. I won't allow you to pull them up, but anything you can do with them in place and undamaged is fine. Carl looked over his notes and rearranged the activation prayer a little so that it flowed better. It wasn't written in common, but some ancient language that used the runecrafting runes. However, ancient Dwarven also used most of the same runes, so Carl decided to go for the prayer in the Dwarven runic language instead of the original language. Mighty World Dragon, Creator of Worlds, Overseer of Might, Patron of Righteousness, grant us insight into the wisdom of the ages. Carl began, following the inscription. An amused voice echoed in his mind. A wise dragon once said you should use all your skill points before begging for more power. Carl burst out laughing and stopped the prayer as the stones pulsed with golden power. Something happened. Mira gasped. Well, explain. Tessa agreed. I started what I thought was the invocation prayer and got chastised for not using all my skill points before praying for more power. Carl explained as he tried to control his amusement. Mira smirked while Tessa and the Orcish chieftain facepalmed. Well, do that and start over. I think that it was working. Whatever invocation you used was enough to activate some of the power of the stones. Mira insisted. She had lived here for years and knew all about the temple. So she was just as invested in seeing a new feature as the others were. Give me a few minutes and I will use my skill points, then try again. I think I understand how they work now. Carl agreed. Carl opened the skill tree and stared in awe at the options presented. Destructive Beast Master 0 points invested. Increases Bonded Beast skill power by 1% per point invested. Invulnerable Beast Master 0 points invested. Increases Bonded Beast damage reduction by 1% per point invested, up to 20%. Blessing of Skill creates 1 random skill. Cost varies based on rarity. 1 point for common skills, 5 for rare, 25 for epic skills, 50 for artifact grade skills, 500 for legendary skills. Blessing of Family 50 points. Creates 1 additional beast space. Planeswalker World Dragon Patron exclusive skill. 100 points. Allows portals to open between adjacent realms the user is familiar with. Compared to many classes, it was a very short list. But what it could do was incredible. Choosing random skills with very limited skill points was a dangerous pastime, but depending on what it gave, it could be incredibly valuable. He didn't have 500 skill points, but another legendary skill like 1000-Year Flood would be insane. The spell scaled to an incredible level. While Remy could create 7 million liters a minute at Overlord rank, Carl would be able to create 8 million cubic meters a minute, more than 1,000 times what she could. At Mythic rank, it would be 9 billion cubic meters of water a minute, and after that, things would just get insane. But what if it was a legendary defensive or attack skill? What sort of insane scaling would a skill like that have? Even Apocalypse was only considered epic. Though Carl did have enough points to get a single artifact grade skill. 20% more damage reduction would be the logical place to start, as it would spread to the whole group and make them even more invulnerable. 2 epic skills was also tempting. Or damage reduction to the cap and 1 epic skill. The others could wait. This decision needed a minute. Now that he thought about it, 50% more damage using all the points that he had saved up wasn't bad either. Well, 50% more for the beasts, which would likely transfer a portion back to himself. A 50% buff to raise damage would be insane, and even Thor's mostly defensive skill set would be a good match for the bonus. There just wasn't a bad option, even if he didn't currently have a use for Planeswalker, as he didn't know any adjacent realms to his world. Unless Tiny World and similar spells counted? He would have to find out once he got the skill, but that wouldn't be today. You know, you could just get 50 common grade skills and then we could do everything. Kara suggested. That alone was an insane idea. But somehow it was suitable to the Chaos Badger. Just learn to do absolutely everything, teach it to the beasts, teach everything that others could use, and you would have the best rounded group in the world. But common skills weren't all that great and might not be a game changer even if they did learn 9 new ways to attack with fire. 10 rare skills might be a better way to spend 50 points. Greater Golem was a rare skill, as were Offensive Adaptation and Disintegrate. All of them were staple skills of an adventurer, so there was little chance that they would go wrong by getting 10 more of them. In short, he was stuck. There were too many suitable options and people were waiting. Chapter 1035, Brutal Pugilist. Carl did have to make a decision though. Reluctantly, he went with a compromise. He would get the 20 points of damage reduction, as that was indisputably the group's specialty at this point. Then he would go for 1 epic skill and hope that it turned out to be a good one. Points used. Max level, Invulnerable Beast Master, 20 points invested. Increases bonded beast damage reduction by 1% per point invested, up to 20%. Carl crossed his fingers for luck and chose again. Random epic skillbook chosen, 25 points deducted. Skillbook obtained, Brutal Pugilist. Brutal Pugilist increases unarmed physical and skill damage by 15% per user rank. Unarmed strikes target the opponent's weakest resistance. Carl chuckled as he read the deceptively simple skill. For him, it was a decent, though not overwhelming skill. But for Ray? That was absolutely devastating. A spider didn't need and couldn't hold weapons. So all her strikes were unarmed. 120% more damage at totem rank, on top of her predation, increased damage, and targeting the weakest resistance of the enemy would tear through armies like paper. Many enemies were strong against certain elements or had great physical defense. But Brutal Pugilist simply ignored that and targeted their true weakness. Carl quickly learned the skill and shared it with Ray, then returned his attention to the stones after confirming that none of the other beasts could use it. Give me a moment and I will formulate a slightly different method. I think that I can find out what I need even though the stones are unlikely to activate. He explained to Mira and the others. Carl continued to use the ancient Dwarven runic language, as he knew that the others wouldn't understand it. It wasn't one that the system translated, and only a Dwarven craftsman would be familiar with the words. Or a runecrafter like Remy. Oh, mighty world dragon, I seek not power. I seek understanding of how these stones work so that I might spread the knowledge in my own time. Carl began. The system stones began to glow faintly, and Carl saw the hundreds of layers of runes imbued inside the stones, forming a massive combined spell when the stones were placed in their correct locations. The knowledge burned itself into his mind, and Carl continued focusing on the stones as the world faded around him and a memory filled his senses. An ancient dragon large enough that his shadow would cover a small city descended from the sky. But just as he was about to touch the ground, he transformed to a rather disturbing-looking creature, 20 meters tall, with tentacles on his face and his left arm replaced by a massive tentacle. But the creature was in exquisitely crafted robes, and the tentacle arm twisted gently as it opened a portal and brought a brown-haired woman through. There were iridescent feathered wings on her back, and she gave off the sort of solemn air that Carl associated with high priestesses. "Is this the place?" she asked. The creature nodded. "Yes. I thought that something different would be appropriate this time. A more natural progression. So, I made them a new system and granted it to every species willing to accept it." The winged woman laughed. "You know that will just upset them again." The creature shrugged, then set her on the ground and shifted appearances again, back to the golden form of the world dragon, but smaller now. The world dragon flexed his wings and waved one front claw to create the round platform of the system stones. Then a massive black tower rose from the ground beneath them, enclosing the stones at the top, and the dragon nodded in satisfaction. Yes, a trial tower to obtain the knowledge of the system for the first time. That will give them all a chance to compete for dominance on this world. He plucked a single scale from his forearm and casually tossed it at the tower, where it seemed to melt into the stones. And now it has a power core. Should we retire back to the house? The children will be causing chaos for the caretakers by now. He joked. The woman gave him a smile that showed true affection and flapped her wings to fly to his back. "First, we go for a ride. Let me see this world you have created, and then we can return home." The vision ended, and Carl realized that the location he was shown was not here. It was the Golden Dragon Nation's capital. The very spot where he had recovered the scale fragment. That meant the first set of system stones on the planet were right there and now likely somewhere under the cathedral. But he also had valuable information about the world dragon himself. The dragon gods were viewed as more of an aspect of their powers, unfathomable beings of immense power. But the world dragon had shown up at the world he had just created with what appeared to be his wife. They were taking a break from watching their kids to explore, and Carl was intensely curious about who those children might be and what happened to them. There was no mention of the world dragon's offspring in the pantheon. They might be there among the minor gods and immortal demigods. However, no knowledge of them being born of the world dragon had been recorded by the people of this world. Tessa snapped her fingers in front of his face, and Carl shook his head. Sorry, I was immersed in a vision from the world dragon about the creation of the first set of system stones when the world was first created. So, you know something about how it's done? Carl nodded, then considered what was needed to make them. I do, but I don't at the same time. The process involves immense amounts of divine power. So, while I could place the base spell or push to activate these ones, it would be entirely up to the world dragon whether the prayer was answered and it actually worked. It's not something that a mortal can do under their own power. But now that he thought about it, he had learned something else as well. He had seen how the trial towers were made. That was something that he could actually do, though to a much less impressive standard than the one that the world dragon had made. It was a form of tiny world spell combined with solid illusions inside a physical stone building. Whether that knowledge was relevant or not was questionable. But when they got back to Drod, he might be able to create an upgraded training ground for the guild house. That would be a huge attraction for the city guards and other visitors. It was also valuable information for Opal. The process of creating the system stones and the trial towers both contained illusion and alteration magic, things that she could use to upgrade her own magical abilities. Once she reached the totem rank, she was fairly certain that she could imbue her illusions with the totemic blessing to improve their durability and create durable illusionary opponents at the overlord rank or lower. Someone of her own rank would cut through them with ease and shatter the spell, but below that they would seem just like the real thing. Chapter 1036, Myra's Decision. While Opal was lost in thoughts of how to make her illusionary world better, Carl was focused on the stones. Their power was still present, undimmed by time. But they had gone inactive, and he couldn't understand the reason why. The whole world was losing access to the system, and the power of the stones was dormant, but it wasn't losing any potency. It was more like it had lost its purpose and was simply waiting for someone to wake it up again. Myra sighed in resignation as she stared at the stones. Well, if there is nothing to be done, then I suppose that's all there is to it. But it's good to know that this relic is genuine. Carl nodded. When you are ready to advance your class, or in need of something that the system should be able to do, try giving a prayer to the world dragon while standing on the stones. If my guess is right, that should be the easiest spot in the world to access system features even as the system retreats from the world. So, it really is collapsing? The functions are becoming inactive. She asked. Carl made a non-committal gesture. For a time it will be inactive. Then it will return again. But the process is slow, like the aging of dragons. It might be hundreds of years before the retreat is complete and then thousands before it comes back to full power. But as long as the stones here remain in their positions and undamaged, they should be fine for all that time. Myra nodded. In that case, when I am likely to be leaving the temple unguarded or it is going to fall, I will be sure to hide the stones somewhere that they won't be damaged or disturbed. That level of power is still well within my capabilities. Do you think that I will start losing my powers as the system functions fail? Carl tried to remember what he had heard from Orthos and others. I don't think so. You should keep your powers for your whole life, but you might not be able to advance once the system is dormant, assuming that you live that long. He offered. Myra looked concerned, then realized that Carl had said it could take more than a century. As a human, that would still put her well into her elderly years, and with troubled times coming, the elderly didn't often last. Happy Lotus noises from upstairs distracted everyone, and Carl led the group up the stairs to make sure that the little cleric wasn't getting herself in trouble. The last one out was Myra, and out of caution she locked the door to the stairs. Then, as she removed the key, the doorway simply vanished. Nothing in Carl's vision indicated that there was a door there at all, or even a hollow spot behind the stone. At first, he was impressed by the cleric's illusion. But the look on her face said that Myra hadn't done anything to change the entrance. The basement door is gone. Tessa gave the confused cleric a look that immediately snapped her back to coherence. Right, the gods have hidden and protected the relic, and I definitely don't remember any such room being in the temple. It looks like the door to the basement is over there. Myra amended. There was another door to the basement down the hallway, but Carl suspected that if you followed it, that the main room where they had just been would not be found. Carl led the group over to the sound of Lotus' voice and found that she was sitting on the floor, playing with rabbits. By the dirt and debris on their fur, they were not summoned creatures but wild animals from somewhere nearby. But that didn't matter to Lotus. She was at the bunny god's temple and she had fluffy rabbits to play with. Naksha just shrugged as the others approached, indicating that there was nothing she could do about the situation and that she wasn't all that concerned about it. The god whose shrine they were at was one of healing and fertility, and if Lotus hadn't been chosen by the green dragon, they would have been a good fit together. Did you find what you needed? Naksha asked while they waited for Lotus to finish. Yeah, I got some very interesting answers and a bit of ancient world lore. That alone makes it more than worth the effort of coming here. Now, the problem will be going back to what we were doing before. Carl replied. Naksha chuckled. What if we're not meant to? We didn't try to revert the last change to the region, why do it this time? I say we just keep up our mission, hunt the excess creatures in the region and anything from a monster spawn, then wait for it to change again. What god asked you to clear out the excess monsters? That's just an impossible task. Between the dungeons and the outdoor spawns, there will never be a shortage of wild beasts and monsters. Mira asked. The black dragon. The number of insane monsters from the spawns was getting too high and upsetting the balance of life and death in this part of the world, so we took up the mission. Naksha explained. For fun and profit. Carl agreed. Mira shook her head in dismay. Carl was most likely insane, she decided. It was a side effect of the system on some people. They got power and forgot what it meant to be a normal person. Or it could just be because of his class. Even the rangers got a bit odd, talking to their hounds and bears, and those were just animals that couldn't truly talk back. With a bunch of predatory monsters in his head, who knew how far his version of reality had been warped. She had often met with adherents of the beast gods in the past, and they were always tricky to avoid offending. It wasn't a stretch to think that Carl might be somewhat the same. Chapter 1037, Pulse of the World. Calling the creatures that Lotus was petting mere rabbits would be a disservice to the less powerful creatures who had to face them. They were actually a nest of commander-rank assassin rabbits, what would have been considered a deadly species at home. But with if not friend, why friend-shaped, Lotus had no fear of rejection and the bunny god's offer had been gleefully accepted. The creatures naturally wouldn't attack Naksha as their instincts screamed that if they approached, the dragon would eat them. And that wariness spread to the rest of the group when they entered. But they only stayed around for a few more minutes, and after that they returned to their den near the temple, leaving Lotus satisfied with her day's accomplishments. Everyone, take a moment to find a shrine for a prayer of your own, and then we can make plans for the rest of the day. It wouldn't be right to stop at a way station with a shrine to all the gods and not at least offer a few prayers. Carl suggested. He made a good point, and they had seen the shrine for the red dragon as they passed, though they hadn't stopped there on the tour. If that was the case, Tessa assumed that all the dragon gods were likely represented. Carl had already done one of his own at the system stones, and he had even gotten a proper response from the world dragon or a system-affiliated deity. An insult to his intelligence, but a direct response from the gods. The others spread out, and Carl smiled to himself as Dana stopped at the altar to Carl, the ancient god of magic. Carl waved at the statue, then continued down the hall, checking the last few altars that they hadn't seen yet. They were more obscure and less followed gods. But there were a few familiar faces. Carl saw the shaman god whose statue Remy had and the shrine to another god of rebirth that he had seen engraved on some of the ancient temples in the Golden Dragon Nation. It had been an incredible history lesson for him today. Not only had he learned about a lot of new gods, but that revelation of how the first system was formed and confirmation that Hawk really did have the actual world dragon scale that was used to form the core of the system was huge. It also explained why the scale was so small, not like one from an adult dragon. The world dragon had reduced his size to more easily interact with his human-sized wife. Carl inspected the scale in Hawk's space, which now had a small shrine beside his nest, resting on a bed of branches on a pile of fire element stones. Hawk's favorite, naturally. Eventually, he would have to make a plan to either reveal the scale to the world or find a proper caretaker for it. Keeping it locked away in a separate space while they awakened it was one thing, but the scale was the core of the system and he could only imagine the benefits for humanity if he were to bring it back fully restored. Well, not just the benefits. Having it back at full strength could well touch off another interspecies war across the planet. And there were already plenty of those going on, but on a smaller scale than the one that was likely to result from that particular decision. Carl absently sat down in a shrine to think and then looked up and realized that it was the shrine dedicated to the world dragon. He had expected it to be somewhat grander than the others, given the importance of the world dragon to the system and the Darklight host in particular. But this altar was different. It had the feeling of ancient power as if it had always been here and wasn't part of the reconstructed temple that was turned into the way station by the guild. You wouldn't believe how strange things have gotten on this world since you were first here. Or perhaps you would, and you knew all along that a smooth ride wasn't ever going to be part of the experience. How does that old saying go? Strong stone does not make a skilled miner? But I really could use a bit of advice on how to deal with the scale you left behind. It has recovered enough now that I couldn't just put it back where I found it. The power that it leaks would draw enemies far too powerful for the Golden Dragon Nation to survive. But it doesn't feel right to just keep it to myself when it's the core of the system. Carl felt a rumbling of amusement in his mind. Who said that it is the core of the system? My scale was just a power source for the trial tower. Carl froze in shock, but the voice was gone. So, the scale is only the core for a trial tower? Did you want me to make another? I think I know the method. Carl asked. Nothing answered. But if the scale wasn't the core for the system, what did they mean in the vision that he had? Was the system here the whole time and the issue was just accessing it? Carl sat lost in thought for a while, then an idea occurred to him. The key was in the name. The creator of the system was the world dragon. The system must be part of the world that he made. Why would he make an incomplete world? No, the system itself hadn't been affected when the tower was damaged. That was simply an access point. The system was innate to the world and the tower was made to show people how to access it for the first time. But then why the fading and resurgence? A flicker of knowledge came to Carl's mind from Remy. The ley lines, the underground lines of mana that ran all over the world, pulsed slowly, moving up and down. They were currently on an upward trend and her shamanistic training books had told the Naga Queen where to look for the places that they were most accessible. So, they should be the reason. When the ley lines were near the surface or even above it, the touch of the world's mana could awaken all sorts of powers naturally. But when they were deep, accessing the system took special tools or knowledge. Both had long since been lost, so when the world's power retreated into the depths, the system became harder to access or nearly impossible. That also explained why the dwarves had managed to keep so much of their power even when they lost the vast majority of their knowledge over the ages. They buried themselves a kilometer beneath the surface of the world. They were closer to the source of the world's power. Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.